Our son comes, he's 22, he always introduces his family and he says, this is my Uncle George, my Uncle David, this is my Uncle Bob. So, you know, he sees me as an uncle, and I'm proud of that, and because he's a good kid doing extremely well in school. I want to thank you for coming today, and I'm going to talk about some things about race relations, which is really multiculturalism, that some people may be a little uncomfortable with, because some people are not comfortable talking about race relations. But we need to talk about multiculturalism. Why? Think about this. SAT is the test you take to get into college. There's a gap between black and Hispanics of 200 points. Okay, you need the SAT to get the scholarship money and the funding. Okay, guess who's getting the funding? Whites and Asians a lot. Now the Hispanics and blacks, they can get grants, so they'll loan them money, they'll loan them money, but the grants, the free money, is being given to those who achieve high scores on the SAT. So we need to be, you know, very interested in race relations. Why is there such a huge ethnic gap in school? Why is blacks and Hispanics scoring so low on the SAT? I mean, the max today is about 2,300, and the average in HISD is 1,200. It's hard to get into a good college with that kind of SAT. And who's getting these low scores? The African Americans and the blacks. And then the Asians, they do wonderful. They're way above the white scores. And guess who gets 50% of most of the money at University of Houston in grants? Asians do. Because Asians, they figured it out. Their parents figured it out. You start taking the SAT in the 9th grade, the 10th grade, the 11th grade, and they keep taking it, go to workshops, and whites don't do that. Even the Hispanics and blacks aren't doing that. And the schools don't encourage them to do it, because why? Because when you take the SAT test and you don't score very high, it looks bad for the school. Because Texas gives a report card on every school in the state of Texas. And then they look at the SAT, oh, well, we didn't do very well, so let's not encourage people to take the SAT. So I saw a figure the other day in one of the high schools in HISD, only 30% of the seniors took the SAT. Now HISD brags it gives a free SAT, but it's the pre-SAT, which doesn't count. It's just a practice. But I believe that learning about multiculturalism is very, very important, because I think it will enhance your life, and you can help others. Because we need to understand that we need to be talking to each other and not about each other. And we tend to do that too much, talking about each other, that person, and we don't talk to each other. You know, here's a definition of multicultural education. Its major aim is to create equal education opportunities for students and adult learners from diverse racial, ethnic, social class, and cultural groups. One of its important goals is to help students and adult learners to acquire the knowledge, attitude, and skills needed to function effectively, so they can interact, negotiate, communicate with people from diverse groups. Unfortunately, learning and understanding and respecting other ethnic groups is not happening in Houston schools. There are no schools in Houston that teach multiculturalism. There's no schools that teach race relations. So, you know, so what's going to happen? How do we get these kids to that? I mean, think about this. In HISD, 200,000 students, only 6% are white. That's all. 6%. Whites are not sending to their school. So how does this kid that goes to HISD school, who happens to be black or Hispanic, understand white culture when they're very rare? It's hard to find them. You go to a public school in HISD, Charlestown Lee High School, you go in there and you'll see almost all minorities. And you say, where's the whites? Where are the whites? Well, guess what? They're there, but they're in a different area of the building. And it's called the advanced placement, the smart kids, you know. And they don't even qualify for advanced placement, some, but in order to make the white families happy, that's where they put them. Now you say, how do you know that, Dr. Kimball? I worked in the school as a teacher and assistant principal. I saw it. I witnessed it. It's wrong. When you look around the city of Houston, you find some neighborhoods where most of the residents are almost all black or Hispanic or Asian. And some people call this voluntary segregation. Some people say it's because of basically economic status. The economic status causes this. I don't think so. I don't agree with it. I don't think it helps contribute to making America united. So how does a child, even you as adults, you know, acquire the knowledge, attitudes, and skills needed to interact, negotiate and communicate with people from diverse groups. If it's not happening in the schools, it's not happening at the churches, how do you get that information? Well, this is one group where you can get that, and this is, I'm really, really happy to see that you all have this organization here to study multiculturalism. You know, you have to recognize that each group has its own culture. It's important that you educate yourself, you know, because if you don't, you know, someday you're going to be either working for, supervising, or have co-workers that are a different diverse group. And if you want to be successful as a leader, you're going to have to understand different cultures. And we don't understand that. There's some people that are uncomfortable talking about race relations. You know, I interviewed some years ago at Pershing Middle School, which is in West University, for an assistant principal job. 20 applicants. And I was the oldest. I think I was about 52, 53. And I never expected to get the job, because here's 20 applicants, most of them in their 30s, sharp looking, athletic, and I never thought I'd get it, but I got the job. And it was 6 people or 7 people that were on the committee to pick somebody. And so why did I get the job over everybody else? And I asked that question after. And they said, because you were comfortable talking about race relations. Now, Pershing Middle School is different than most HISD schools. Like I told you, 6% overall in HISD are white, but at Pershing it's about 25 or 30% white because it's in the West University area. Another reason I got selected is because I was selected, the opening was for 7th grade assistant principal. Well, guess what? The 6th grade assistant principal was a female, black. The 8th grade principal was a female, black. So they needed a white man. I mean, so, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. You need to have diversity. You know, why would you know, if you had all 3 black females, that's not right when 30% of the population are white. You need diversity. And that was another reason I got selected. But let me share another personal story that helps explain why what I'm saying here. About 10 years ago, a black man came to me. He had graduated from University of Texas at Austin. And he wanted my help in understanding white culture. He had gone to Head Start program, and all the students were black. He went to high school, and all the students were black. He went to the University of Texas in Austin, where it's a very small percentage of black students, but that's all he hung out with. So then he gets a job with a major corporation in Houston, which has mostly white employees and management. And he just didn't click. He didn't know how to interact, he didn't know how to engage, he didn't know how to negotiate, and he got fired 6 months later. And he felt totally unprepared to work in a white group, with the right group of people. And that's because he had really, all his life, been around people that were black more, felt more comfortable. And so, you know, it's so important to get outside of that world and get into another world. Those of you who have students in HISD, keep in mind that, you know, you're going to have to teach them about multiculturalism. You're going to have to teach them about race relations, because they're not getting it at the school. You know, I applaud this young guy for recognizing his lack of skills in working with another ethnic group and for seeking help. Most people have trouble with their bosses, employees, or co-worker, want to conclude that they all are stupid, lazy, idiots, or whatever. You've heard that in your workplace, you know, when you're talking about somebody, but you know, it may be a cultural difference here, and you need to look at that. But, you know, again, if you have school-age children, keep in mind that when they're taught at school, they're taught white history, not Hispanic history, not African American history. And you've been reading the papers, you've been hearing this big debate, State of Board of Education. Wanted to get Martin Luther King out of the history books. Wanted to get Cesar Chavez out of the history books. You know, that's who we have that's kind of in charge down there in Austin. And so, you know, it's going to be your responsibility to teach your kids about ethnicity and about these different people that have made a huge contribution to American history. You know, you need to, like, get some books and share it with them on ethnic groups. If there's documentaries about different ethnic groups, sit down with them and watch it with them. Movies like The Help is a great place to take your child and introduce them to diversity and the history of African Americans in this country. A lot of people were surprised when they saw that movie because, you know, it's only an older generation like me that remembers that kind of stuff. I attended a movie not too long ago with some people, acquaintances, I'm not going to call them friends. We're coming out of the theater, and then all this theater's letting out, and it's all black folks, almost all black folks coming out. The movie was Why Did I Get Married Too, which I've seen is a great movie. And so they said, oh, I would never go see that movie because that's a black movie. You know, these people are not educated. We don't, you know, if you don't educate your children, and sometimes your brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and grandmother and grandfather, then you know you're not gonna help the situation. Let's visit the definition of prejudice. Prejudice is having a preconceived notion, belief about others without any basis in fact. So how do you fight prejudice? The answer is you educate people on the history and culture of other ethnic groups. Again, unfortunately, you're going to have to do that. It's not being done at the schools and at the churches. And it's not too much done on the TV programs or the movies. You know, we all know that America has a long history of discrimination and racism. We struggle today, and we're going to continue struggling in the future. Today, September 21st, 2011, would you believe that in Arkansas, there is actually a superintendent of schools who has the title of Superintendent for Desegregation? Today, 2011. Wow, it's been 57 years since Board of Education, and we still have people responsible for desegregating schools in America. You know, the military, which I was a member of for 27 years, has a long history of dealing with multiculturalism. It holds classes for these soldiers. Every student, it holds classes for them to let them know about how people are different. I remember in the early 60s as a soldier at Fort Benning, Georgia, I was shown films on blacks and said, look, here's a black family. They actually live in a house, they actually have children, they actually dress well, and they keep their house clean. But you know, I applaud the military for doing this because a lot of people in the early 60s didn't have that perception of blacks. Didn't have it. And so the military made every soldier see that film. And they worked hard at trying to integrate blacks into the, having white soldiers understand blacks. And when I got to Fort Benning, Georgia, in '63 I got there, got off the bus, you know, separate bathrooms for blacks and whites. That was a surprise to me. I'm from New Hampshire where there are very few blacks. And I was really surprised to see that. And then I learned real quickly that the military were not allowed, the United States government was not allowed to send anybody, any soldier, to Fort Benning who was married to somebody where the spouse was black. Because interracial marriage was against the law in the state of Georgia and also Texas. And so the military, here the government couldn't send them there because they'd be subject to arrest. That was in the early 60s. And that's embarrassing and it's disgraceful. And in '64, a law was passed that said you can't, Congress passed a law that says you can't do that anymore. And then in the 60s and 70s, I happened to be on military bases where there were race riots. Blacks and whites fighting, military police coming, big, huge race riots. Few people have written about that because it's not much out there about it, but it did happen. I was there, I experienced it, I watched it, I walked in the barracks. Sometimes we had 2 guards with us with CS grenades and guns going in there trying to break up race riots. You know, so you fight prejudice by educating others, and that's what the Army did. You know, for example, when women were integrated in a massive scale in the Army in the 70s, they had training for all the soldiers to get them ready for women to be in their units. And just this year, you all have read the papers, the Army went through a huge training program and trained every soldier in the Army, Navy, Marines, and Air Force on accepting gays into the military. I mean, that's what you do. You have education, you have training. And the military is up front in doing that kind of stuff and has a lot of experience. But in the civilian world, we're not doing that very well. We're not doing it in the schools, we're not doing it in the churches, and we're not doing it in organizations. They used to have, so in colleges, they've got some programs called Mexican American Studies, African American Studies, which are very much needed in colleges. And a lot of students are interested in taking them. But in some states, especially Arizona and New Mexico universities, they're trying to close those programs down. They said, we don't need African American Studies, we don't need Mexican American Studies. But they never say we don't need Asian Studies. So Asian studies continue. You know, we've changed a lot of laws. I want to bring up something here really important. You need to understand that you can change laws, like in '64, what we said, you know, the laws that said, you know, when blacks were not allowed to go into restaurants in the '60s, and we had the sit-ins, and the government passed laws that says, okay, you can't do that no more, it's against the law. So what did they do? They changed the behavior of people. You want to stay in business, you got to serve blacks. But guess what? They didn't change attitudes. There's a huge difference between behavior and attitudes. So these people that had to let the blacks in, you only changed their behavior. You didn't change their attitude. Attitudes are kind of permanent, and it's really hard to change attitudes with people. And so a lot of times today, people will behave because it's the law to not discriminate and be racist. But inside, a lot of people still have that really prejudiced attitude, a belief about others without having a basis in fact for it. Today, as you all know, there are still people who hold prejudiced attitudes, and you know, I personally have had contact with Hispanics and blacks who tell me they hate whites, and I've had contacts with whites who said they hate blacks and Hispanics, and when you want to discuss it with them, it's just the way I grew up, you know, we just were told that way, you know, and it's inside of them, it's an attitude. And this same person will go out there and you will think they treat you equally, but there's a, you know, you don't know their real attitude, and you can pick that up after you get to know them. You know, and they're not afraid to tell others. Fortunately, you know, those kind of folks are getting fewer and fewer in between as we continue to educate people on multiculturalism and things like this go on each day. You know, a year ago I was talked into helping a family friend. He was in the police academy here in Houston, and he needed some financial support. So I provided some. And so one day I was having lunch with him, and he got this text message. And it was a racist joke about blacks. And he started laughing about it and was fixing to respond, and I said, what are you doing? I said, you know, you don't tolerate people that tell black jokes. You don't, you know, you just don't let them do it. By laughing and responding to that, you're saying it's okay to tell racist jokes. Don't do that. And I admonished him for it. And you know, you just don't do that. Because it's degrading. It's not okay to exchange racist jokes. You know, I told him in reply that he didn't want to receive those jokes again. You know, I challenge each and every one of you to never allow a family member, a friend, supervisor, or coworker to tell a joke or make a comment that degrades others of another ethnic or cultural group. Tell them that is totally unacceptable. Stand up and do the right thing. You know, even if it means losing your job. Because it's just not, you know, you have to do the right thing when it comes to people. Because, you know, you want people to treat you just like you want to treat them. When I was a captain at 24 years old, I was a commander of a unit, and our unit was sent to Mississippi on business. And we were 5 captains. We all were commanders of 150 men each. All men, because we were combat arms. So we sit down at night, we're playing cards. And all of a sudden, the black jokes come out. You know, when one was telling this joke about, oh, well, this police officer found a black guy dead under a tree, and the police officer said he had 100 stab wounds, and it's the worst case of suicide he ever saw. That's a racist joke. And I got up from the table very angry and upset with him, and I says, how dare you say these kind of things when you, as a captain, have the authority to demote a soldier. You have the authority to put him in prison. You have authority, I mean, at a company level, just to explain this, you're the judge, jury, and executioner. You hear the case, you give punishment, and you do it all. And don't go anywhere else, just the captain and the soldier. And that captain has all that authority. And yet, you know, they have black soldiers in their unit, 30 to 40%. Huge percent of soldiers in the combat arms that are black. And they talk like this, and they said, well, we were just joking. Come on, sit back down and play cards. I said, you don't joke about those kind of things. Racism is not a joke. And so, you know, you need to stand up for those kind of things to do what's right. It doesn't matter what people think as far as peer pressure and all that stuff. You cannot tolerate racism in any way, shape, or form. Recently, a very famous talk show host, he's on TV, I won't mention his name, But he made a joke, a black joke, that was totally inappropriate. He said, you know, President Obama and the Speaker of the House and the Vice President were out golfing. And he said, it's too bad because then they can't tell any black jokes. That's a racist joke. That is not funny. That is not, there's nothing funny about telling jokes that degrade other people. You know, unfortunately, again, kids in school don't know how to deal with prejudice. As an assistant principal, I ran into a lot of problems with race relations, even today. You know, there was 3 white kids that in middle school that hit this black kid and pretended he was a slave. And they talked him in a degrading way. And so he was brought to the assistant principal, 6th grade assistant principal of the 3 kids, and the assistant principal was black. And so she said, okay, 1 day suspension. And then the parents complained that the principal was being prejudiced toward the white kids. And so insisted me, a white man, which was a big mistake, to be the administrator and give the punishment. So I heard the case and I gave him 3 days suspension. Because the lady went easy on him because she was afraid of the racial overtones. Friday, I went to a high school. I'm active in the LULAC, Hispanic organization. Also, I'm a member of the NAACP, and I get called on. On my card says pro bono educational consultant. I do it for free because I don't want anybody to challenge my motivation. But this kid was 18 years old. He was told by his assistant principal, get out of school, and they had a police officer escort him off campus. Get out of here. You can't do that, you know. And I wrote about this in this book, and also I wrote about it in an article for the Georgetown Journal of Poverty Law and Policy about bouncers. There are assistant principals who go around, and I walk with these assistant principals at high school, Sharpstown High School, and Lee High School, where they say, okay, you, get out of here by school. But you know what they do is the kids get scared, he gets out, they don't get any paperwork whatsoever because they don't want documentation. Because they're going to keep you on the rolls till October 28th, which is the snapshot day, and they get paid $5,000 for every kid that's on the enrollment status on October 28th. And then they just mark the kid absent. And so you can't do that. And so I went to the principal, and he's a white principal, and the school is 90% Hispanic. And he just doesn't like Hispanics. I just sense that about him. And I said, you can't do this. The law says you cannot kick kids off of this. So he said, well, I'll let him back in Monday. And that was this Monday. And you know, he still hasn't called the student to have him come back. And so I'm going to be getting on the phone with him. And I tell you what, I have contacts with the media, the Houston Press, the Houston Chronicle. Houston Chronicle was at my house yesterday taking pictures. And you know, you don't mess with me. When I go there, and I know what the facts are, I know what the laws are, and if you don't do the right thing, you're going to be in the newspaper and on TV. You know, I've been challenging those who are prejudiced and discriminate for most of my adult life. I recently published a memoir that disclosed many of my experiences being raised in poverty. I'm a high school dropout. 9 of my brothers and sisters are high school dropouts. My mother never learned how to read and write. She was born in Virginia. Her parents were born in Virginia. Her grandparents were born in Virginia. She never went to school. Never learned to read or write. And 9 of my brothers and sisters are, like I said, are high school dropouts. So I know a lot about dropouts, and I work a lot with the dropout stuff. I published several articles on dropouts. I go to the school boards, talk about